Hey everybody, lesson 9, part 2. Let's discuss fairness and justice. Fairness and justice. This is probably a less talked about lesson than the last one. We tend to have probably all heard lessons on pain and evil and suffering, but I don't know that we always talk about fairness and justice from a biblical standpoint, and I think it's important for us to do so. We tend to, as a culture, experience a lot of injustice. Life is just full of injustices. We see that in the legal systems. Right now we're seeing it in a lot of the debates because of police brutality, and those are supposed to be the people who are upholding us, and then you've got others who are trying to say, no, the police protect us, it's just a few bad eggs, but the fact that there's a few bad eggs in a system makes people want to throw out the whole system, because we recognize in any sort of legal system there's going to be injustices. There's going to be the innocent who are convicted of crime. There's going to be the criminal, the guilty who end up going free. How many of us have moaned about the fact of people getting out of jail on good behavior and then falling right back into jail? How many times have we heard of drug addicts who get out of drugs or out of jail and go straight back to drugs? There's just a lot of those types of things that happen in a legal system. And a lot of people will, because of that, cry, oh, this is so unfair. Well, the same's true in moral systems. There's just a lot of things that don't seem fair to people because of moral system. Let me use the Bible as a for instance, which is in and of itself a moral system. One of the things that you hear people oftentimes talk about is that God would just want me to be happy. And what we do is we try to create a moral system that is half scripture, half personal interpretation based on what we want. Well, that's no objective standard, of course, but it's still a moral system, and it's full of all sorts of injustices. People try to claim that the Bible is unfair all the time. Ultimately, whenever there's these injustices, you have innocent who are harmed. The innocent will oftentimes be those to experience unfairness. This is really what the big debate is going on right now is it unfair that our black communities have been stereotyped in such a way that creates a bigger problem for them? And you have some who are saying, no, it's completely fair because of statistics, and this is what should be the expectation. But then you've got a lot of innocent people who are crying foul because they're not out there committing crimes. They're not out there trying to hurt people, yet they get lumped in with the rest of them. The innocent tends to be the ones who get harmed in any sort of system. It's not the criminal who gets harmed, it's the innocent. And that becomes a very important discussion point for us as we try to defend our faith. In this particular system, what's interesting to me is that all of us desire justice. At least we claim to. We cry foul because we believe that whatever decision has been made or whatever event has happened or whatever judgment call has been pronounced, somebody has been treated unfairly. And so we cry out for justice. We cry that things aren't fair. We cry that things should be different than they are. The truth is, probably most of us don't want justice, especially when it comes to God's rules. We'll come back to that in just a moment. I will say this from an apologetic standpoint. Our desire for justice makes no evolutionary sense. The fact that we want things to be fair in no way advances humankind. It in no way preserves our species. The fact that we want things to be fair it doesn't make any sense. When you get to the survival of the fittest, it's not fair that one animal was created as a greater physical specimen than another animal just because of genetics, because of breeding, whatever it is, and therefore that species is now a greater species. It doesn't make any evolutionary sense that certain animals have survived and other animals have gone extinct. Just look at the dinosaurs. It would make more sense that the dinosaurs should be the top of the food chain right now. Yet where are they? They're extinct as far as we know. And so when you see that's unfair. That's not the way it's supposed to go. But that's just the way it is. This whole idea of justice and fairness is really something that is contrary to evolution. It's contrary to the natural progression and evolution of humankind. Where does that sense of wanting what we perceive as right come from? There's really no biological explanation of that. I also will say that we Christians should be pursuing justice. We should be pursuing right decisions, that good judgment calls. We should be pursuing that the right thing happen, whether that be through the law. We should be allowing the law and helping the law to make those right decisions. That being said, I don't see in Scripture where it says we should pursue it personally. It is not our job to give people what's coming to them. It is not our job to seek revenge, and that's very clear over in Romans 13. Romans 12. It is not our job to demand that we be treated fairly. That nowhere in Scripture do Christians ever are ever told to expect to be treated fairly. If anything, quite the opposite is true. We should expect to be treated poorly by the world around us. We shouldn't even necessarily expect to be treated fairly by our own judgment, even by other Christians. The Bible's very clear, especially in the book of 1 Corinthians, that we are not to take our brethren to court. Well, that seems unfair. If they did something wrong, they should have to pay for that. They should have to fix that, right? Not according to 1 Corinthians. 1 Corinthians, it's interesting that it says that instead, we should be judging one another. We should be making sure that we're holding one another accountable. Well, that doesn't seem fair. People should just leave me alone, right? Not according to Scripture. Matthew chapter 5 talked about if I know my brother has a problem with me, I should go to my brother and fix that problem. I should leave my offering at the altar and go to my brother and make sure that we are in a good place before I offer the very offering that I had left at the altar. You get over into Matthew chapter 18, and it talks again about forgiveness, but here it says, if I have something against my brother, I should go and fix that. That it's not about what I can get, it's not about what is fair, it's about restoring the relationship, whatever that takes. Back in the Sermon on the Mount, it talked about if somebody asks for your coat, give him your shirt also. If he asks you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. And the principle behind that Jesus is referring to is that a Roman soldier could take somebody and say, hey, you have to carry my pack for the next mile. Completely unfair. They can disturb your day. They could completely interfere with the way you think your day was going to go and make you do this chore for them in carrying their stuff for a mile. And what Jesus says is even when you're treated that unfairly, you go with them 2 miles. If that's not clear, because it's more of a cultural thing, whenever you're slapped on the cheek, what are you supposed to do? Turn the other. That's not fair. Absolutely, that's not fair. Because it never says in Scripture that Christians should expect to be treated fairly. Instead, Christians should use those opportunities in which we are not treated fairly to display grace, to share grace with others, to make sure that they are understanding that we are not like them, that we are not going to pursue things the way that they said they should be pursued. Instead, we're going to be like Jesus and turn the other cheek and go the extra mile and give the shirt off of our back and not pursue justice, but to offer grace. That's hard, especially when you really understand what grace is. Grace, by definition, is giving somebody something good they don't deserve. Well, that's not fair. People should get what they've earned. People should get what's fair. They should be able to only get what they're supposed to get. But that's not grace. That's not grace at all. Grace is fundamentally, by definition, not fair. And what's interesting is we all want to receive grace, but very few of us want to give it. We don't want to give grace to others. And when we talk about grace, it's uncomfortable. We don't really like the idea of grace. Grace is something that doesn't make sense to our human brains. It is something that is contrary to the way we tend to think as people, because we're pursuing justice and fairness, right? But there's nothing just and fair about the way we're supposed to be treating other people. We just don't like the idea. We're not comfortable with the idea of extending grace to other people. And to be honest, it's something that we're so uncomfortable with in the church that we've even failed to study it properly, because it just isn't something we like. It can be argued that by offering grace, God himself becomes unfair. That God himself becomes a God of injustice instead of a God of justice. Well, I want to clarify that particular issue real fast by saying one thing. That would only be true if God only offered grace to certain people, but not to other people. The fact that God offered salvation to all men, it says over in Titus chapter 2, verse 11, the grace of God has appeared, bringing salvation for all people. Not some people, not a chosen people, not a special people, not a people just whatever he wanted by some arbitrary standard like a Calvinist might teach. No, God offers grace to all people. That's why his grace is fair. Everybody has the same opportunity to come to God and experience this gracious and wonderful gift that only he can give. And if we are willing to receive the grace of God, which is unfair, because that's not what we deserve, then we should have grace in our personal relationships. We should have grace in dealing with others, even when we disagree with them, even when they hold convictions that we don't hold, even when they have a political affiliation that we don't agree with, even when they're supportive of even things that we believe are wrong, like abortion or homosexuality. We should be extending grace to them. That does not mean we should be falsely agreeing with them, that we should be unwilling to talk to them about truth. That's not at all what grace is. Grace is not just bending over and letting other people treat us in horrible ways. Grace is none of those things. Grace is letting them know that you love them even though you believe they are wrong, and that you will continue to pray for them and wish for their good, and you will continue to talk to them about what is important. All of those things come into play when you're extending grace to others. We should have grace in our government. The government's going to make bad decisions. They're going to make bad laws. They're going to do things that we disagree with. That's okay. They are still God's servant. They are still accomplishing God's will. God is still in control of those governments, and therefore we should have grace toward them. We should have grace in our spiritual relationships. We should have grace in realizing that there are some who are weak, who we need to be patient with, and there are some who are discouraged that we need to lift up, and there are some who have struggled with the same sin over and over and over again, and we should continue to extend them grace just like God does. The last thing I want to say here about grace is this. Grace, properly understood, is a teaching instrument. Grace, properly understood, is a convicting thing to experience. Grace, improperly understood, is something people take advantage of. That's not God's grace. Grace, properly understood, causes us to be indebted, causes us to love God in a greater way than we ever could have loved him without it, causes us to have hope and conviction to change. If that is true with our relationship with God when God extends us grace, then that is also true in our relationship with others. That if we will learn to extend grace in the right way, if we will learn to show that kind of power in our relationships with others, that kind of meekness with others, well, then it will teach them, it will be powerful to them, it will shine a light to them that will point them to Jesus in a way nothing else will. When we're not out there calling foul and pursuing justice for ourselves, nothing wrong with pursuing justice for others, but if we're not pursuing justice for ourselves, but realizing that the call of belonging to Christ is the same thing as suffering with Christ, well, then we will do well in extending grace and to others and receiving grace from God himself.